Good evening. Welcome to the Greytown Council Workshop of November 16th, 2023. I'll begin with roll call. Councillor Meany,
Present.
Councillor McGuire,
Present.
Councillor Gass,
Present.
and I'm Councillor Chapel, and Councillor Height will join us as soon as he can. Tonight we'll be talking about some potential revisions to the personnel policy, and our HR director, John Hart, is here to talk about what those are. Do you want to just give us a quick overview of the changes? I know we all have the packet here and online, but just for the audience watching also.
Sure thing. As I mentioned in my memo to the council, we're proposing amendments that address aspects such as workplace safety and disciplinary procedures, and we're seeking the council's guidance on compensation-related issues such as meal breaks and the definition of years of service. As we go about implementing a new time card system for staff in the coming weeks and months, these issues become even more critical. Our goal is to ensure that the personnel policy reflects the town's commitment to fostering a positive work environment and ensuring the well-being of our dedicated staff. Your consideration and guidance are invaluable, so thank you in advance. Before we begin, I'll note that in the packet you've received, I've provided two documents in addition to my memo, proposed draft with changes in red, and the current personnel policy document with strike-through text in red. Because Microsoft Word, its track changes function wouldn't work for something of this length and complexity, I've made changes manually. I've done my best to be precise, but please let me know if you find anything that I've overlooked. So I thought I would ask just the council if they had any questions to get us started, if there's a specific place that you would like to start. Otherwise, I could run chronologically, but I don't want to waste your time with ground you've already tread.
I don't really have a strong preference. Did anyone have questions that they were percolating on, they wanted addressed sooner rather than later?
I have about 7.
Okay. Wow.
Do you want to take them as we bump into them, or do you want to do them up front?
7.
Okay.
I mean, either way, I don't know. Page by page seems a little bit tough. I looked, and to be clear, I looked strictly at your red.
Yeah, same.
Insert for changes.
Same here.
I didn't look at the whole policy or read it line by line.
Yeah.
So I mean, I start on page 10. Does anybody have something earlier? Packet page 10, that is. Yeah.
I do.
Okay.
Packet page 9, B, where it talks about equal opportunity. The constant sort of, actually, I'm second guessing myself. It just feels like this is one of those things that's ever changing. And when it does change, is it something that, I guess it isn't anything that we can capture with kind of a CX for, do you know what I mean? So that we're
Right.
not constantly changing the policy. That was my only thought. We do that with ordinances and things more now so that we don't have to make these changes, but there may be reasons you don't want to do that with this. That was my only thought.
Just in response to that, I think that if you add an appendices, it ends up, just ballooning the policy anyway.
Okay.
So we can update it as we go.
Yep, I wasn't it's just a thought I went.
At least in this way, we're only including one definition in one place. Previously, we had it in multiple places.
Fair enough, thank you.
Is this based on the Maine Human Rights Commission's
This is the
protected classes?
Equal Opportunity
Oh, equal,
Commission.
okay, yeah, right. I mean, it seems to me, if you just say as amended, but I think this is fine as it is. I mean, you could say, because you reference ADA, I see, and Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the Maine
Yes,
Human
yep.
Rights Act, yeah, so, you could limit it to as amended, the ADA, ADAA, and just, that protects you if you don't get around, or we in the town in the future don't get around to updating this specific information. But I don't know.
Adding to the end of that first paragraph, you mean?
Well, if you, in B, if you said merit without discrimination as to, and then you said it was the, what did you cite?
The EEOC.
So, and say, at that point in time, as outlined in the EEOC,
Yeah.
which includes, and you can have your list, but then to Ann's point, because you have the other part there, we're covered if they make a change and we haven't.
Although, the one argument for just, putting the language right in here is that most people are not gonna go ferreting out, what the ADA says or the EEOC or something. I mean, so it might be better just to have the language in here, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would advocate for having both the language and then the reference to the law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just, I think, so long as, I think it's the save for the inevitable time when something's not in there.
Yeah,
It's the being able to say that, as pertains to this act, which, and I don't know what the language would be, but which includes the following and may include additional things or something like that. Just so that we have that flexibility of somebody being able to not say, well, you didn't include it in the list, kind of thing.
Right.
Thank you.
Welcome.
anything else on page
Nope.
9?
Nope, that was my only
So,
thing.
wait, just to be clear, are we going page by page or just where people have edits? We are,
We're doing and 7.
okay.
Yeah,
all
I
right.
was just
Just
going,
and
I wasn't
seven,
going
okay.
page by page, I
All
was
right.
just going to the pages where I had some sort of
Got it.
question or something.
Okay.
Packet page 10, numbers 6 to 8, those bullets.
Just so you know, I don't have the packet pages. Do you have?
Okay,
the,
this
uh,
has to do with higher date.
Section 2,
Yeah, it's section 2, I'm sorry, yeah,
E6.
E6, 7, and 8.
Section 2, 6, 7, 8. Yep,
Definitions, yeah.
I've got it.
Yeah, and so my question was, it wasn't clear to me if a change from a per diem to full-time position results in a change in hire date. I mean, you sort of say explicitly in 6 that the hire date stays the same regardless if there is a change in position classification. And I just wasn't sure what you meant by position classification. So if somebody is per diem and goes to full-time, is the hire date the same then still?
The hire date would be the same, but then the anniversary date would change.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Also on packet page 10, section 3, recruitment and hiring, under job opportunities, I guess another question I have is about the first sentence there under A, job opportunities, reads, "The recruitment and selection process for town vacancies may vary with the position, but as a standard practice, all positions not filled by internal promotion will be publicly advertised through multiple mediums." And so I guess my question is it our practice to fill positions through internal promotion without ever advertising externally for that particular position, or how does that work?
That's a good question. No, typically we do advertise. I'd say that this is more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't presume that we can always advertise when filling a position. Sometimes there's some urgency to it, and it would depend on a number of circumstances.
Yeah, for example, when we made the assistant director position, that was a no-post promotion from internally.
Okay, all right.
And that was also due to a unique set of circumstances too, whereas generally we do try and do a full posting with, certain weight given to the current employee.
That makes sense to me. I'm happy with that.
Is that standard practice in most places? I'm just
To do what?
to not always require that you post a job regardless of whether you're filling it internally.
It's really up to the employer.
Okay.
I would say, though, that municipalities tend to lean toward more transparency. So
Yeah.
that puts some responsibility on us to be as forthcoming as possible. And it's in our best interest to advertise whenever we can.
When you said post a job, Krista, did you mean advertise externally?
Yeah, I mean, well, I suppose I suppose you could just post it internally too, just to give notice to the current employees that there's a position open, yeah.
That is something we do.
Okay, that's good to know, yeah, because it does add some just transparency with staff knowing what's shifting and whether or not there's opportunities, so.
Our habit recently has been to at least notify employees when there is a vacancy.
Okay,
So when someone's leaving, that we're posting the position and that we're accepting all candidate
okay,
applications.
yeah, that seems fair then, yeah.
Ah. Anybody have anything on
No,
11?
no,
Sorry, my next question had to do with packet page 12, which is, let's see, under promotions and transfers, down at the bottom of the page, so it would be page 9. What is my question? If the, I just thought it, this is maybe needlessly nitpicking, but I just was curious, this particular section doesn't seem to address, or reference the fact that a promotion may end up with a budget impact, or is this assuming that a promotion is an existing position and we're simply promoting somebody or transferring somebody into that? It seems like, it says, like on the top of the next page, it says, the second sentence, any salary offered for a promotion will be determined primarily based on the employee's qualifications for the new position and internal equity within the department. And there's no reference, it seems like there could be situations where there's a budgetary impact. I don't know if that matters within a particular fiscal year.
Absolutely. What we've tried to do I think it's in the category on classifications or recruitment, make it clear that when we are hiring, that much depends on the council's approval of that position. So, forgive me, I'm not seeing it right now, but.
There's somewhere else it does reference the budget and the budget impact. I can't tell you
Oh,
off the
yes,
top of my head.
that's on page 8 of the draft.
Okay.
This is section 3, subsection B, classifications. The second paragraph there, each position is assigned a salary or wage range
Right.
in accordance with the approved budget.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That makes sense to me.
Having that there, though, does that, sometimes our budgets go down and not up. I would hope that future councils wouldn't impact people's salaries with that, but having that there, does it infer that if the budget for salaries went down, that potentially everybody's salary could go down?
Oh, which part?
The one you just read under, that each position's salary or wage range is in accordance with the approved budget.
I mean, I think that should be part of the council's deliberation when a budget is approved, that we're
Right.
considering each position as having an economic value, and then if a certain position isn't going to work for the approved budget, then that would need to be, there would need to be some advance notice provided to that department.
Yeah, and again, I would hope that most councils wouldn't, remove or decrease someone's salary based on the budgets they're approving. I just want to make sure the language is reflective of our process, and I think it is. I'm just raising it.
I think you'd be dealing more with
Yeah.
layoffs. It should, with the scenario
Yeah,
you're dealing with is in
right.
the event we suddenly had half the town leave, we didn't have any property taxes, then the
Yeah.
budget would of course shrink and we would have to adjust staffing rather than say,
Yeah.
John, you're now making half of what you did yesterday. Congratulations.
Okay, yeah,
So
that, you're right.
That was kind of my thinking.
You're
So,
right.
yeah.
I think I didn't wrap my brain around, the possibility of layoffs. But yeah, you're right. That we'd probably approach it that way rather than impacting
Right,
someone's
right.
individual salary.
Right.
Yeah.
Or reduction of services, part-time
Yeah.
to full-time, or however, so, rather than, straight, by
Yeah.
the way, you're not making as much, because,
No one's gonna be happy.
right, yeah, if you,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm just working through it in my head. Sorry.
Yeah, that's what we're here for,
Yeah.
to work it
Yeah.
through.
We're workshopping this.
That's
And
right.
I meant to say this at the outset. I mean, this was a lot
It-
of really
it
good
was, John.
work. And
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of,
Thank you.
both the reformatting of it and and the additions, I think, help to clarify things, so I really do appreciate that work.
Yeah, thank
But-
you.
Anything else on the next couple of pages?
You're driving the bus.
Okay,
Yeah, you're
all right.
driving it.
Let's see, packet page 15, which is, let's see, I'll get it in a second. Page 12 of the policy. And I just wondered, you have under B, meal break, and it's blank on the number of minutes. Does that vary according to the, or are you looking for
No,
input?
I think
Part of the
we're-
discussion.
Yeah,
That's
we're,
the guidance.
that's
That
a
is part of the discussion.
conversation we're having, but maybe we should go through edits and then come back to that as a
Okay.
conversation piece.
Okay, the next page, overtime. This is, that's number, see, at the bottom of page 13 of the draft, and it's overtime, and this is reflective of my having worked for myself for 30
Page
years.
13
and,
of the draft?
Page 13 of the draft, of the.
Packet page 16.
And it's packet page 16,
Oh,
yes,
thank you.
Yeah.
That's where I lost you.
Yeah, so I've worked for myself for 30 years, and I just don't, and I'm my sole employee, so I really don't know how this works. And do part-time employees get no overtime?
No, they can earn
Oh, they
overtime.
can,
If they
okay.
go in excess of 40 hours for the work week.
Or
Or,
in the case of, I'll say that there can be an exception. Public safety is its own exception because the way they calculate their hours. But one of the exceptions is public works, and the way they calculate overtime is on the day, which is more generous to the employee. Everyone else is on the 40-hour minimum work week, but they calculate by the day. So if they work over an 10-hour workday, then they receive overtime for that.
I see. So, so if my contract says I work 20 hours a week for the town, and I don't get overtime until I've worked 40, is that the way it works?
Right,
Yes.
yes.
does that,
Well,
do we have any
that's
salaried
That's
employees
too
though? That
perfectly
wouldn't be,
fair.
that,
No, if
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
getting,
that's the group one.
but if
Right.
I'm only gonna get paid for 20, then there's a gap of 20 hours that I contributed basically for free before I can get
oh,
overtime.
with the exception of.
Right.
Got it.
You're still getting paid.
So if a 20-hour week employee works 30 hours, they're going to get paid their normal rate for the full 30 hours
Okay.
worked. It's only once they go, under normal circumstances, without the
Oh, yeah.
exceptions, only once they go over 40, that's when you start to hit the overtime
That's when you
criteria.
get time and a half.
Right, I see, okay. Okay, that's where you get 10 and a half. And it just isn't clear to me that a part-time employees, it doesn't, are able to get additional, they don't get overtime until after 40 hours, but it just wasn't clear to me that they get compensated for the difference between what they're contracted to work and 40 hours. But, I mean,
No one works for free in the town of Gray.
okay, I was
That
just,
is our goal.
just wanted to make sure that was the case, sorry. That makes sense to me. I wasn't really thinking in
Oh, yeah.
terms of the overtime being time and a half clicking in.
There's one other exception, and that's callback pay. So if a part-time employee were called back outside the regular workday, then they would be eligible for callback pay,
Okay,
Yeah, that's a
and
different,
that's time and a half.
that's a different conversation.
Okay.
I struggle with that, but.
okay.
Well, we're here, can we talk about the firefighter public safety issue? Or
Sure.
do you want to do that separately, or?
Perfectly okay to me, with me, yeah.
When we have an open position and an employee doesn't want to take that open position because they're making a significant amount of money on overtime, I have an issue with that personally. And I think most taxpayers would, quite frankly. If we have an open position, if we have a full-time position, you can't stay part-time because you're making more money because you're getting paid overtime.
Are you
In
talking
my-
about
in my-
part-time employees though, or per diem employees, which are
Either way,
specific to firefighters?
If we have an open position, and we have an employee who's working part-time, and they want to stay part-time, that's okay, that certainly should be their choice. but they shouldn't be able to earn an overtime rate for above their part-time work. I mean, we're talking a significant amount of money.
I have two thoughts.
When you get into the warrants, you would have a better understanding of what I'm saying, but that's, I don't know if this is the right spot to talk about
I hear what
that.
you're saying from a budgetary perspective, but I don't know how you can force someone to be a full-time employee when their lifestyle or whatever decision they made in order to be a part-time employee is dictating whether or not they want to be part-time.
But if they're working consistently extra hours to make the overtime pay,
But they have to work 40 hours in order to get that. So you're saying there's frequently circumstances where people are working 40 hours as part-time
I
employees?
want to be careful about
Yeah.
how I characterize
Yeah.
the.
I can help if.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, what do you say, John?
So two thoughts on that. The first is we can't require an employee to change their
Right.
position.
Right,
We can make that offer. Another thought is that budgetary questions, when it comes to a department's budget and the way that that money is spent on overtime, can absolutely be a conversation with the town manager. And I think it's important for us to be able to track those budgets so that we know whether or not the budget is going to be matched as opposed to exceeded. And it can be a policy for the town to minimize the use of per diems. The challenge, this is my third thought, the challenge with the public safety department is it can be more challenging to find full-time firefighters than per diem firefighters.
right.
And if we have an opening, it is because we can't find someone to fill it. We can't require someone to fill that position, but we can limit the number of per diem hours because those are hours we're offering to employees. We can choose to offer nothing in excess of 40 hours.
But then we're not.
It would be 42 hours.
But then I would have concerns, especially with fire rescue, that we're not covering our shifts in a safe way. That's where I would,
I think it's an offline question
Yeah.
that can be worked out with the department head.
I think that within, generally speaking, I think the rules for breaks and lunch breaks and overtime rules and when people get paid for overtime should be the same throughout the organization. So to your question about, Public Works employees making overtime after 10, I personally think it should be overtime after 40.
my
But-
guess is they probably do that because of, the way they have to address
Right,
snowstorms.
and
Sometimes
sure they
they're
work
working like straight
20
through
hours
for
straight.
20 hours. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a hard shift regardless of,
I don't see where that would figure into it.
Can I play devil's advocate?
yeah, sure.
So just to play devil's advocate, the thinking is that our departments are very different from one another, and so the needs of the department will vary. And the needs of the public safety or the public works department, it has to do with staffing, driving routes for plow drivers, obviously, and to accommodate for certain contingencies that we have in excess of the workday. And they're already working 10-hour workdays. So when you make someone work an 11-hour workday, that's going above and beyond to some degree. Yes, the department has chosen a 4-day work week.
Right.
But I think that's some of the thinking behind it. It's the staffing for these contingencies, and it is, by the way, there is a distinction between, and I tried to make that clear in the language that we have, between callback and overtime for employees, because for callback, there is a minimum of 3 hours, whereas overtime, it can just be 1 hour that's worked beyond the time. So that is one way in which we can control costs. But I'd say in terms of fairness, is it fair for one department to work different hours in that regard? I'd say that yes, it is, because they can have different work schedules. There is going to be some variance in the work schedules that our employees work. I'm thinking, for instance, of the transfer station, and some of those positions are working only on the weekends. And one of the reasons why we have incentive pay for the weekends is those are hard shifts to fill. So similarly, for the Public Works Department, we need to have those incentives when we are asking employees to work additional hours, because those additional hours cut into their family time, et cetera. So, again, playing devil's advocate.
No, you don't have to involve the devil. And I think I'm in the minority here, so I'd say we move on.
Well, I mean, you've only heard from me. I don't know about how Ann and Marty and how Matthew feel about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I buy that departments are different, and the work that they do is really different, and so I'm more willing to accept those changes. And although I know that there's been some discussion among staff of even the, staff who aren't in Public Works going to a 4-day work week, and so, and other towns have been doing that evidently. So, I mean, it may end up that we're all in the same place.
Yeah,
Well,
Different work
let's see.
ethic.
So, I'm for now. I think this is fine the way it was written. Where is the callback in there?
package page 17,
Section H.
Section H under section 6.
page 14, packet page 17, bottom of the page.
Callback pay. Okay, yeah. I searched on it and it didn't come up. So maybe because it's an edit. I don't know. Okay. Oh, it's because I didn't hyphenate it. Okay, yeah, I see it. Thanks.
It's, yeah, never mind.
Marty, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add on the?
No, I'm good with that.
Okay,
I understand the overtime part.
yeah,
I did that enough.
In that 1H, that first line where you have callback in quotes, there's no hyphen there. I don't know if that matters to you, but.
I think that's, it's because of the way it's phrased
Yeah,
differently than,
it's
Yeah.
phrased differently.
yeah.
Okay.
Matthew, I know you're just settling in. Did you want to talk about, no,
I don't have
okay.
anything to share.
All right,
Thank
that's
you.
fine. Okay, sounds like we have majority feels that it's okay as stated currently.
Okay. My next question has to do, it's packet page 39, which would be page 36 of the draft. And this is just a really basic thing. I mean, there's references in the draft to workday as opposed to business day, and I'm sort of interested in that. I mean, I'm more accustomed to seeing business day. Is there a reason for workday?
I would consider those terms synonymous, but I don't have any particular opinion or leaning one way or the other personally.
I think it kind of just lends credence to the non-standard times. I mean, the library and the transfer station work differently than panel.
Right.
To me, I think panel would be like kind of, business day versus various departments that stay open later, earlier, weekends, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I just see it as a more inclusive term.
Yeah, I think that's right. That makes sense to me. The previous conversation helped to inform that, yeah.
It might be worth making a definition of it, just to clarify it, so.
Yeah, adding it to definitions.
A definition of workday or
Yeah.
business day?
Adding a definition of what the town means by workday,
Okay.
and then just the day.
To Josh's point about, the workday is different for different people among the staff.
Yeah, that makes sense. And my last one, packet page 40, which is page 37 of the draft, and under written complaints to the council. I don't know whether it's necessary to stipulate this, but should we stipulate that the hearing would take place in executive session? Does that?
Doesn't
It
have
can't
to.
require, we can't require that it
Okay.
does.
Oh,
It's-
interesting.
Yeah, you give the person who's complaining the option and they can decide how they would like to proceed. Yeah.
Well, that's, see, this is.
So
30
we're
years.
very familiar with this
Would
process.
it be worthwhile to
Through
throw
this
in a,
reason.
maybe
Yeah.
an executive session, just to kind of identify it as a path, or just leaving it off would probably be advisable?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean,
Well, or even
is
just
it
put it in
addressed
there,
elsewhere
the
in the
choice.
document? Of that it's up to the employee's choice?
No. No.
But that's just, is that state law, or is it?
It was the
As
legal
for-
advice that we received, yeah.
Okay.
It's also
Yeah.
in statute as
Yeah.
as one of the reasons why a council can go into executive session is to discuss a grievance process outside of public purview.
Okay,
And there are statutes and all steps related to that too, so. But it does not say it must, it says, the council may.
may
Yeah.
elect, okay.
I think we
I think
have
that's
in the past defaulted to it
Yeah.
if the employee doesn't express an interest one way or another out of confidentiality, say.
I had one comment in that section. First of all, I was really happy to have this outlined more precisely than our current policy. So under what is now number 4 in the grievance procedure, it talks about if the grievance is due to the town manager. Most of the grievance complaints will go to the town manager eventually, but if the grievance is with the town manager, it would come to the human resources director. Just wondering if we should also have some content in there if the complaint is with the human resources director. I assume it would go to the town manager.
That would go to the town manager.
Okay, all right, yeah, I just want to make sure that was clear, but,
Yeah, I think there's a special, this complaint is specific to the town manager because he's
Okay.
the supervisor
right,
of
I
all.
understand, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I guess that would just, the HR would be technically department head, so it would follow that same process, okay. That's fine. All right. Did
Uh,
anyone else, you had some edits, Dan?
No, actually, I don't have any additional ones that I want to make, but to Ann's point about the work, I want to just say specifically that while I appreciate the difficulty of editing such a big document and having edits, that makes sense. While it's not quite the standard we set out for ourselves, it was very, very clear, and it made going through this a whole lot easier. And I appreciate your attempting to do it that way.
Okay. If no one else has any specific edits to language, we should circle back to the meal break conversation. And then, was there any other policy decisions needed to be made tonight? Yes, okay. Whenever those are, just flag them.
Is that on your key areas of amendment? I
Yeah.
realized that I flew through that and didn't
Yeah, I know.
read it carefully.
This is a workshop, right? So
Yeah.
not-
No, we're not voting, but it's just, advice for moving forward. Yeah,
We can do straw polls. And
yeah.
I'm just looking for the page.
Mm-hmm.
Page
Oh, the meal
15.
break page?
Oh, I found it. Page
15,
12
packet
of the
15.
draft. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the language is, employees who work 6 or more hours in a workday are permitted a paid meal break not to exceed blank minutes. Employees are to be completely relieved from duty during their meal break. Meal breaks and any short rest breaks are counted toward hours worked. So currently, the way it stands is that it does depend on the department, but there's a paid meal break in every department. So it does vary from 45 minutes to an hour as a paid meal break.
Wow.
I think that, and I think we've discussed this previously, there's just been a tradition of combining breaks into one break. So you might consider the morning 15-minute rest break and the afternoon 15-minute rest break combined with the lunch break to be an hour long. And if you only take one break during the workday, you're going to give that hour to someone. And I don't know exactly how it originated. I can only speculate. But that's been the tradition for a long time. And so if that were to be changed, if we wanted to go with no paid break and just an unpaid break of 30 minutes, that is the minimum by law, by Maine law. So we must provide for, during a workday or business day, if someone works 6 hours or more, they must be provided a half-hour break unpaid. So it would be up to the council to decide what we would like to do going forward. The reason why, as I've mentioned, one of the reasons why this has become very timely is we are moving to a new time card system, and this sort of thing can be tracked for every single employee across the board, the exception being public safety because they have a special time card system. And what I'm interested in as the person who has been administrating the payroll is how do I go about deciding between departments, between employees. It's so much simpler if we were to have a shared understanding of what that paid break will look like.
So it's different from department to department is what I'm hearing.
I'd say that generally speaking, it's different from work site to work site.
Okay. And just for my clarification and those watching, we're not talking about salaried employees, right? This is only applicable to groups 2 through 4, is that?
I would think in
Right.
spirit, it would apply to salaried employees as well.
Okay.
That's why, when we
All
were
right.
kind of discussing it, I put in the not to exceed rather than any specific time. Just as
Okay.
I would hate to see people on salary being, I'm taking my 3-hour lunch, you guys have fun.
Well, sure,
Ju-
yeah, well,
just to
that would
kind
be a
of
huge
clarify that
abuse
that
of
would-
the,
right,
yeah.
right.
But I'm just thinking, with salaried employees, they work sometimes irregular hours, so.
Because this hasn't been in
Yeah.
the policy,
Yeah.
there's never been a standard way of doing things. I can tell you since I've been here, this is since 2021, our tradition has been to tell salaried employees to take a half hour, but there's not been any standardization of that. There's nothing in our policy that says you must do X, Y, or Z. So if one supervisor decides to do it differently than another, as long as we're meeting the minimum, we're being consistent in that respect, but I would love for us to be more consistent across the board.
Mhm.
And so, although there might be variety in a number of our policies, I'd say that this is one policy where we want to be more regular.
Yeah, more consistent, yeah. And so, so employees, I'm just gonna ask a stupid question, the employees don't have to, especially the ones who are hourly, don't have to clock out at lunch, because right
Correct.
now it's paid, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. And
There-
if we were to continue to pay, then that would still not be,
And there is a function right now, I believe, in time clock where we could do that, where there's a way to program it so to say a punch in and punch out midday is recognized as a meal break and still counted as hours worked at the end of it. But again, the things are changing up very soon too, so let's not make any plans based on what
What's
we were
current.
just doing that's about
Yeah,
to go out the
yeah.
window.
Right, we kind of have to have an eye on where we're going with it, and I believe that because of the potential of this new system to track salaried employees' time, we use the time card system in much the same way, with the exception that employees could have the option of tracking their time using the system online versus having to actually physically be
physical,
present.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems there's kind of a two-part question. One, do we want to continue paying for meal breaks and the 15-minute breaks also? And two, are we going to continue to allow people to group their breaks into one long break rather than 3 separate occasions for a break? That's what we need to decide on.
So
right?
by Maine law, again, going back to
Yeah.
the minimum, it's a 30-minute unpaid break. There is no requirement for an afternoon or morning break.
Right.
Although it has been the tradition, just generally speaking, to allow that a little bit of flexibility if
Mhm.
someone needed to check out for a few minutes to take a phone call or
Yeah.
something. So I think there's some precedence there to do that, but that's the minimum. That's the only thing that the town is required to do.
But
And
we're above the minimum currently.
we are
we're
currently above
paying
and beyond the
for
minimum. Yep.
what seems like an hour-long break.
Another
Right.
question that's often been asked me is, can can employees take their meal break at the end of the day, opt to
Oh.
leave sooner in lieu of taking it in the middle of the day. That's the presumption that you would take it in the middle of the day, though not every 8-hour work period is, 9 to 5, that sort of thing.
Right,
So it's not necessarily going to be a lunch break that the person takes. There is currently that flexibility from department to department to take that meal break at the end of the day.
would that be clocked any differently, or,
Would it be clocked differently?
I don't,
Somebody would have,
It's all paid
somebody
work
would have
time.
to clock them out at the end of their
Or
work.
probably adjusting entry probably on the payroll report would be the best way to, like the employee would punch out and then the person doing the summation sheet for payroll that we provide could put a notation in.
Or it's
Okay.
automatically accounted for.
Right.
So there is that minimum.
Okay.
If someone takes, I keep hitting this, I'm
No,
sorry.
it's fine.
I'm not used to having a microphone
Yeah.
in my face. So if someone takes, works for 6 hours, they automatically get that 1 hour added on. So even if they don't have to clock out and then clock back in, there is no mechanism like that, but there is automatically going to be an allotted 1 hour after that.
okay, Dan, I know you have a question.
It's okay.
Just so if someone
What do you
works 6 hours and we pay them for an hour lunch, are they actually getting paid for 7 hours of work?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, Dan, sorry.
So I'm a little confused. The state doesn't require, I thought the state required two paid breaks.
I thought
Not
they
to my
did too.
knowledge.
No, every time
Oh.
I checked, it's just, the minimum of, as far as I've time with past statute is, as John Big said, it was the 30 minutes for 6 hours break, and that can be unpaid. I think that's the only statute regarding rest periods that is on there.
Okay.
What about an
that's-
8-hour day? Does that have
There's
rest
no-
breaks? No,
Does it have rest breaks?
yeah,
No.
I think, yeah, again, statute language, I believe is, again, every employer can make their own policy,
30
but by
minutes,
law.
that's it.
If we
Okay.
were giving breaks to people working over 6 hours, that's where we run afoul of it. So long as we recognize that, we are clear legally.
okay.
So there's a whole bunch of questions there on the table. I think personally, and again, this does certainly vary from department to department, but for different reasons. I think anybody who's working an 8-hour day or a 10-hour day needs to have breaks in between. There's plenty of evidence to be shown that
Yeah,
without rest time, whether you're looking at a computer all day or you're working for Public Works, doing more manual labor perhaps on some days, that there are some real advantages to that, not only from the standpoint of just the employee's health, but frankly, from a workers' comp standpoint and other issues. So I'm personally in favor of those two 15-minute breaks
I
myself.
like that too. Well, they have
For,
an hour
for
lunch.
those reasons. I mean, you can't look at a computer screen for 7 hours straight and hope to keep your eyesight. I would like to know how we compare, how this benefit compares to the other communities that we sort of benchmark ourselves to. Before I guess I get in, unless we have to make a decision tonight. Because my inclination is that we shouldn't be paying people for that half-hour break. And I'm also against the idea of people holding on to their break until the end of the day and shortening their day that way, for a variety of reasons. And certainly in a public-facing position, we're scheduled hours of operation to be open a particular set period of time, and allowing some people to do that and others not to feels like it could create some stresses in that setting. So I'd be in favor of ending the practice of being able to save your hour or your half hour and putting it at the end of your regularly scheduled day. And I would also be inclined to stop the practice of taking your two 15-minute breaks and being able to combine them with your half-hour lunch break to
I
make
agree
an
with
hour lunch break. For the same reason, because it negates the value of having the 15-minute break in the morning and the afternoon. I certainly understand why that would be attractive to people. But but I think it undoes the purpose of having those 15-minute breaks.
Well, right now, there's no standard code for the 15-minute breaks at all. And more
Right.
often than not, if you were to survey probably the department heads and departments, hopefully you might be able to get a 15-minute break. Because a lot of times you do have workflows and issues that would oftentimes negate, and I would say it's pretty rare for people to have a standard 3-break schedule in the course of a day.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that it has to happen, at 9:30 every day on the dot, but I think that, even in those busy situations, one of the reasons we've been adding people is to try and make sure that we've got enough depth to cover the work that needs to be done, as well as, the unforeseen absences and things like that happen. So, yeah, I guess that's where I'm at right now.
I agree with that, Dan.
I agree with, the idea of combining the breaks for, I agree with Dan about what he said about not combining the breaks, and also not shortening the day. But, I guess I feel like, if the practice has been a 30-minute paid break, I mean, I think the 15-minute breaks should certainly be paid. But I would favor, if the practice has been a paid lunch, to just take that away is significant, significant impact to workers that I would hesitate to do unilaterally and without compensation.
The thing I struggle with, if you're scheduled to work a 6-hour day, why are we paying someone for 7 hours on a daily basis?
I don't know of anyone who's scheduled to work a 6-hour day.
Okay.
But my assumption would be, like, to point of clarity, if someone's scheduled to work from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., that would allow them to 1 half-an-hour break in the middle. That they do not get an extra half an hour added on to, they'd not be like they're punching out at 3:30.
Right.
They still work the flat 6, but having reached that 6-hour threshold, then they still have the half-hour meal break that is currently paid in the day somewhere.
Right, if it's unpaid, they'd be here for 6.5 hours.
If they want to make back that time, and then you get into the weird, well, suddenly
Well,
you
it
have
wouldn't be, it wouldn't be a matter of wanting to make back the time. I mean, if you have a set schedule, say you work a 6-hour shift, just for argument's sake, that was what we were talking about before, you'd be scheduled to work 6.5 hours every day, for which you'd get paid 6, and you'd have a half-hour break in the middle. I can imagine I'm not very popular right now for saying that out loud.
I think that would if that was taken up, and saying that if we weren't gonna pay and would have to adjust the schedule based on that, so everyone now working a normal 8-hour shift with a paid meal break would have to work 8.5 hours in
Right.
order to maintain that full time. The logistical challenges that would present in the immediate are tremendous.
Why?
Because you would have to have an extra half an hour of work incorporated into a workday to ask people to change a schedule they've grown accustomed to, and also to possibly not have a business reason for that apart from to compensate for the meal breaks.
We've got plenty of work to do. I mean, I don't understand how that would be an issue at all.
Okay.
But I mean, that I'm always open to the fact that I'm missing something, so
I mean,
enlighten me.
I might be in the minority, but I think the trend in employment nowadays is to be more liberal in time off and give people the flexibility to get their work done in the time allotted, and if they need to take time off, to allow for that, just because people's lives are complicated. I'm a little worried I know that the statute says we can make it an unpaid break, and there are budgetary impacts for maintaining the status quo, but I feel like we might be getting a little overly prescriptive in a hiring environment that is extremely competitive, and I worry that we might, if we start down this path of dictating to people how they organize their workday, we might lose people, and it might make it more difficult to hire.
That was why
That's-
my first question was, what's the
Yeah.
norm? What are other,
Yeah.
what are the towns around us doing for paid lunchtime and break time and things like that?
Yeah. Anne, you had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Krista. And the last real job that I had when I was working for somebody else was I was working for Maine Housing, and at the time, well, during the period that I worked for Maine Housing, I started out with I had a 1-year-old when I started, and we had our second child while I was still working up there, and we had issues with with our child care. So my husband and I were able to work out an arrangement with both of our employers where one of us would get to work early, and be able to leave early. I think so that speaks to the flexibility thing that you were talking about, Krista. I mean, I think in my case, it wasn't, I still worked the same amount of hours, and I don't think I tacked my lunch break on to the end of the day. I just got to work at 7 o'clock in the morning instead of 8 or 9 or whatever it was. And because one of us would, be on the morning shift, and one of us, whoever didn't do the morning shift would do the pickup in the afternoon. And we were just trying to accommodate our care providers and not have our kids, in childcare for 60 hours a week or something. So I do favor that flexibility but I think it needs to be kind of and this is where I suppose it could create some tension, but it does need to be at the discretion of the department head. I think there needs to be some ability for the department head to say, yes, if all the clerks want to leave early, that obviously that's not going to work for us, and so that's what I mean by discretion. But I think especially for employees who have dependents, whether they're children or aging parents or something of that nature, if we can accommodate and provide some flexible schedule, I think that's going to help with retention, and ultimately we'll have happier employees.
Yeah.
Can I ask what is what you're describing, Anne, I think of as like flex time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is the current policy as far as flex time? Usually it's like, well, you have core hours, 9 to 5 that have to be covered, but people can come in, as long as those core hours are covered, people can come in, at 7 and leave at 3:30, or come in at 9 and leave at 5:30, or whatever. I mean, if you don't have a paid half-hour lunch. What's the current situation with that?
Currently, we don't have a flex time policy,
Okay.
so we don't have any language around that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the general rule of thumb is that when someone is going to be more than 15 minutes late, not only informing your supervisor, but then taking out an absence request for that time and tracking that time.
Right, yeah, I saw that. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
I'm running late today, so I'll work late. I'm talking about,
Regular schedule.
like what Ann was saying.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna work, I'm gonna come in at 7. My schedule is gonna be to come in at 7 and work till 3:30. Or my schedule is gonna be, to come in at 8 and work till 4:30. I guess I would see that as a good and beneficial policy
Yeah.
for employees, and maybe that could, implementing that policy could, if we decided we didn't want to pay for the half hour, could offset, like we could say, well, we're gonna implement this flex time, but sorry to say, we're gonna take away your 30-minute,
Mhm.
paid break.
Yeah.
That's just a
Yeah.
brainstorm I'm having right now.
Yeah, that's a good, that is a good compromise. I definitely would also be in favor of having a firm flex time policy outlined if that's something we could. I know that wouldn't work for every position in town, so that might add some complexity.
I think it could
The-
add a lot of complexity, actually, and
Right.
cause a lot of strife
Mhm.
for those that would be eligible to have the benefit and those that can't because of the nature of their work.
The complication, I think as Councilor McGuire is mentioning, is that it makes time tracking more difficult.
Okay,
So when does one consider that leave time? So how flexible can you be? And so that's where carving out flex time parameters is really important. And it makes administrating the leave process far more complicated. So that's where we've defaulted to, there is no flex time, though, as we've been talking about, the meal breaks has provided supervisors some flexibility there. So if your default hours are 9 to 3 and you would like to take a half hour of your lunch at the end of the day in order to leave a little bit early, or, you know, arrive a little bit late in order to leave early, I'd say that generally speaking, that's how it's been used. But
you say there's very few people working a 6-hour day.
very few people are working a 6-hour shift. That's
Right.
correct. Most are working an 8 or 10 hour, or sorry, 7.5 to 10 hour shift. Yeah.
7.5 because.
because we're paying for the meal currently.
So currently, the way that this gets into work hours, so it's a little more complicated because our panel employees, those who are working in the administrative offices here in town office, are working a 72-hour work week. Sorry,
36.
36-hour
Oh, no.
work week.
Yeah.
I'm thinking bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly, yeah.
That's my default. And so when we calculate their hours, those hours are going to be 36 total as the normal. And so if they work over the 36 but under the 40, they don't receive overtime. But those who are working a 40-hour work week and they work over that, they work into overtime. So that is one of the, you know, the additional complexities of the town of Gray.
So we pay for a 40-hour work week, but most people work 36, and then we are also paying for meal breaks within those 36 hours.
No,
Is that-
we're paying
Okay.
Employees who are working within the administrative offices here are working a 36-hour week.
Okay,
That's all they're being paid for.
okay,
So even salaried employees, you'll notice that their clock time, if I were to work a regular week, even though I work far more than a 36-hour work week, that's the regular time.
okay.
I confess, all of this is news to me, actually, relatively recently, and I just don't understand why we're working at 36. It's a mystery to me how we've gotten into this pickle, because that's what I consider it, to be quite honest with you. And clearly, it's because there wasn't any coordination or any requirement to have any standards broader apparently than the department level. It's a fairly feudal system, it seems to me, in some respects, where the department head seemed to be able to make the rules that worked for their department.
I think it's also inherited from 2 town managers ago, kind of set a template for here's what Pennell did, and then had instructions for here's what not Pennell did.
Yep,
And then to a way, those are still kind of the echoes of what we're hearing right now, as this is.
all these things are often inherited, and
Right.
they're all painful to change. That's why I go back to my first question was to try and get a sense of, if I worked at Cumberland Town Hall, or I worked at New Gloucester Town Hall, or I worked at Bridgeton Town Hall, what would be the offering? Not to say that we should automatically do what everyone else does, but we have
Yeah.
worked over the years to,
Match the market.
to
Yeah.
match the market and to some extent, standardize our processes so that we're measuring ourselves against a like group of communities. And I'd like to have that information for this part of the discussion myself.
Regarding paid meal breaks,
Regarding just breaks and meal
Breaks and
breaks and
Breaks.
end of the day and all the various
Flex time, yeah.
permutations that we have
Yeah.
going here.
But I would just say that doesn't reflect the actual compensation, you know, that one aspect of the compensation package doesn't reflect the entire compensation package. You know, like, if they don't get if a town doesn't pay for the 30-minute lunch break, but they have higher pay on average or whatever, then, it's not just one, I don't think you can make the judgment, it's just one thing. There's a suite of things that people use to decide where to work.
Well, I wasn't suggesting that's the only one.
Right?
But
I'm saying, because other towns don't do it, we shouldn't. It's good information to have, I agree, but only in context.
given the difficulty that we have covering some of the hours and the amount of work that we have, I don't understand why we're not asking people to work a 40-hour week. Granted, there's a budgetary, component to that, there's no doubt about it, but if you've got 10 people and they're each working a 36-hour week, you're losing a person's week's worth of work in that calculation. That's a significant amount of ability to get stuff done.
The 36 hours comes from Pennell hours. So those are the hours that the building is open.
Right.
So that's how it's been calibrated to when we're open.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but for instance, when Nate was here, he was, advocating strongly for the fact that people needed time for when the building wasn't open in order to be able to get their work done. And we were closing the building and narrowing that 36-hour window in order to give people that time. But if people worked a 40-hour week, they'd have that time. That doesn't necessarily mean that the building would be open for those 40 hours. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, and again, I guess I would, to Krista's point, I think there's a certain attraction to working a 36-hour week versus a 40-hour week. And if we just, unilaterally change that, without any sort of give, just take, I think that's problematic.
Yeah,
In this market.
yeah. But also
In a
just,
sense, just in a sense of general fairness.
Yeah,
If
sure.
they had a contract, if they had collective bargaining, right, we wouldn't be able to unilaterally decide this.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, but we didn't have any say in getting it to be the way it is.
Oh,
That's part of the
I-
beef, to
I'm
be
not-
quite frank.
I think this is a good discussion, and we should be discussing these things. I'm just saying, we shouldn't just be acting, unilaterally in one direction.
And there's no value in cutting our nose off to spite our face.
Right.
I do understand that, but I think there is a middle ground here, and I'm not sure where it is yet.
The reason why I chose not to address that issue, and I think it ought to be addressed just from my personal standpoint, professional standpoint, is the equity question. And I think there ought to be a standardization in
Yeah.
terms of, just across the board, there's no reason why we can't be flexible in terms of scheduling while also working a 40-hour work week or a 36-hour work week across the board to ensure that there is that uniformity, so that someone won't say, well, just because I don't work in that building, that's not fair. And so I would suggest that this be taken up again. It just has to be taken up with the consideration that this is going to have impacts that are financial and certainly just across the board in terms of our staffing. It could impact in a negative way in order to try to remedy the situation. And so that's where I think that it's a matter of timing. I think that meal breaks are something that can be achieved now. If just in terms of making a decision in the short run, in the long run, I think, again, this is my suggestion to the council, it would be advisable to re-examine the 40-hour work week across the board in the context of a budget conversation.
I guess I hear what you're saying, but I'm a little confused when you say, when you say resolve it, are you recommending that we increase it to 40 hours across the board, or
I
keep
think
it
it's a
as
much
it?
larger topic than
Oh,
if we can.
That's a-
okay.
that's a big
There's
topic.
so many,
Yeah.
it truly is the can of worms, yeah.
Right, okay.
So
But-
let's say you were to decide today, you wanted to change it so that everyone worked a 40-hour work week.
Right.
So that would impact certainly everyone who works in this building in significant ways in terms of leave administration and obviously in terms of their work schedule.
Right.
And so does that mean that their pay would increase proportionately, or they would proportionally work?
Lose on an hourly.
They would lose on
Right.
an hourly basis
and
Right,
salary
They would get paid
versus
less
hourly employees and.
to work more.
Yeah.
right,
Right.
It's a good discussion to have, but again, I think that this is definitely, it's a lot of detail, a lot of moving parts, that a lot of implication based on what we do. And I think it's a conversation to have, but I think that while determining whether meal breaks should be paid and the length of them, it definitely kind of goes a bit outside of that. So
Well-
back to the point at hand, I think I volunteer myself to grab some data from neighboring communities. And my question would be, I'm happy to geographically, and also do you want me to use the comparable communities that were identified by Nate when they were doing the salary adjustment? Or are there any?
Can I just jump in?
There was a list of,
yeah, go
So
ahead, John.
I already have that data
there
in
you go.
terms
Oh.
of the number of hours that are worked and what hours are worked
okay,
versus comparable communities.
Okay.
The question that we had earlier was whether or not we have the meal breaks
Right.
nailed down.
yeah, so
And
that
I think there's a lot of, just informally, I can say, just anecdotally, there is some variation, but it is typical for those lunch breaks to be paid in part. And so that's where if I come down on a side, would be, in order to make a minimal change right now, some paid break, and then that amount would be up to the council. But my suggestion would be to not make a radical change, but at least institute some regularity in terms of what you'd like to do, in terms of how long that break should be. Whether it's paid or unpaid, that's completely up to you, but the more you vary from what we've done traditionally, the more impacts it has. If that
Right,
makes
and
sense.
I think, you can do things, we don't have to make all the changes at once. But I guess right now, because we've gone around the bend quite so many times, what specifically are you suggesting with the result, as far as lunch breaks and the 2 15-minute breaks are concerned?
Well, currently, I would say the minimum has been, when we're combining those two breaks, if that's the way that it works, a 45-minute minimum. If you chose not to combine breaks, but to make those breaks outside of the lunch break and optional, then you could do a 30-minute paid break, meal break, and then encourage the department heads to further incentivize taking morning and afternoon breaks. That's one option. Another option would be to just say, well, let's stick with the 45-minute as a minimum break that can be used to the discretion of the department head. But right now, there is no uniformity.
I would favor your second option of the
Yeah.
45-minute break and leave it up, going back to our discussion of flex time, I might need to take a 45-minute break to go run an errand and,
Yeah.
on my lunch break. And honestly, we're all grown-ups
Right.
and ultimately, it's really about, is the work getting done? Are we providing coverage sufficient to meet the demands of the residents of the town? And so I favor building in some flexibility there and not, because not everybody can take a break from 10 to 10:15 or, just to throw out, and from 2 to 2:15 to 2:30. We can't standardize those breaks. And, realistically too, people need bio breaks and they might, their water cooler conversations. Effectively, people are taking breaks during their workday. and again, I mean, what matters most is the sort of productivity in a way, it's hard, people are different. I mean, some people, I'm the kind of person who likes to sit down on my computer and just motor through stuff, I don't take so many breaks, but some people may, because of some physical impairment or some issue, may need to get up every hour and move around for 5 minutes, and that's probably healthier anyway. And
It's recommended for
it
ergonomic
is.
reasons.
Now that I'm 64, I'm seeing the value of getting up and moving around more often. Believe me. So I don't want to. I mean, I think having a standard 45 minutes, provides an option for people to make decisions as grown-ups what they need to do with their workday to have lunch and have some breaks and maybe run an errand or whatever they might need to do.
Just really quick before you continue, I'd like to walk back what I said in terms of recommending a specific time. It's really not up to me. It's really up to you all. I defer to the current town manager too in making a suggestion, so I feel like I overstepped a little bit.
No, you're certainly the expertise in this, so
Yeah.
or the expert rather, so I value hearing your opinion. Josh, you had,
I was just gonna say, one of the things I believe that if we did get every department head here and tell me exactly what you believe the policy or your practice is for breaks in your department, you are gonna have wildly different answers.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought that the approach of saying, here's your maximum meal break, paid, then gives the department head the ability to manage them with this while still retaining the half an hour break required by law. But some days go different. Sometimes, at the transfer station, those guys need breaks on a hot day to make sure they're
Yeah.
not gonna get heat exhaustion. Or again, the screen fatigue, and there's
Right.
and not every location is the same, and not every, not every shift is the same. And the one time there is a 6-hour shift is probably at the library on Saturdays. We're open from 9 to 3 as our hours of operation. So just kind of a scalability so that everyone is on the same page as far as here's where your limits are, but then the authority to kind of stagger it accordingly. Was my kind of thought, rather than kind of getting a one-size-fits-all approach, letting everyone in on saying, here's your guidelines.
Yeah.
I guess I'm asking for your
Yeah.
guidance
yeah.
to tell me what to put into the computer.
Yeah.
Weren't we saying earlier that there are a lot of employees though taking a full hour? And didn't we-
Are there employees taking a
Yeah.
full hour? Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
because I mean, I think is an hour lunch break or however you want to stagger it, is pretty standard. Most jobs I've held have had an hour, especially salaried jobs have had an hour lunch break.
You've been a lot luckier than I have.
I mean, I don't, maybe that was just my experience personally, but I would be in favor of having a maximum of an hour break, whether you take that in half-hour increments or a half an hour increment or 2 15-minute, however you, I think it's a little rounder also. I don't know, it's just something about 45 minutes that feels odd to me, but that's just my opinion. We're here to make a decision as a whole group, so I don't know what others' thoughts are.
I think what you say makes a lot of sense. It's just that, yeah, I'm just so accustomed to thinking in an 8-hour day and, 2 15-minute breaks and a half-hour lunch break. I mean, that's, that's my mindset from my work life. But it makes sense to me, to allow flexibility, and it does add up to an hour. So, that makes sense. But, yeah, I don't see the 15-minute breaks in this policy. They're not there, right?
Right.
Right.
It hasn't been written down, and
Right.
it's not
That's
statute,
federal
it's just
law.
how it's been common practice here, is
Right,
my
Right,
understanding.
it's
yeah.
common practice in a lot of places.
Yeah.
So that should be, worked into the policy, right? That,
I'd be a little bit wary of that just in the impact. There are some days where sadly people don't have this time, the capacity to allow those 15-minute breaks without fundamentally altering the course of the services and, access points for the public. There have been times where we've had one person run the clerk's office. There have been times, extreme instances where they have, so.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be modeling ourselves to the extremes of the exceptions.
But I also, I absolutely not, but I also think that, again, flexibility to the allowability or feasibility of it at any given time certainly fluctuates. And trust me, this town definitely, rather than tacking towards, we need to make sure people are doing the bare minimum. My greater concern is people doing the maximum. Sometimes you have to shove people off their desk in order to have them take a meal break, or demand they stop working after they punch out because they're trying to wrap something up.
Yeah.
And this is not directed by department heads. This is just the
Work
spirit
ethic.
of the work ethic of the people
Yeah.
we have here.
So,
So yeah, that is a concern that we will be addressing, John, just so you know. Like people on vacation calling in, I'm like, record your time so it's not counted as vacation time, and just, it's a battle that I'm slowly dying on, so that's what I gotta say about that.
well, in terms of the rest breaks, we do have this language saying meal breaks and any short rest breaks are counted toward hours worked. So I guess what you
Okay.
could do is lump it into that.
Yeah, maybe change the title or to include just breaks, or,
Okay.
maybe not singling out meal break.
Right, but I would definitely codify if over 6 hours, must take a 30-minute break. That is part of the policy that I think should be in there, just to ensure that we are on our policy compliant with the law.
So you're saying we should have a not to exceed amount and then another
With a
line,
caveat
with a
for
caveat that you have to take at
Employees
least
work
a
over
half
6
hour.
hours must take a minimum of a 6 hour, or working at minimum 6 hours must take a 30-minute break.
Yeah, I think you're right. If
At
that's,
this,
if that's a legal statute, we should especially call it out, yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, also on the other hand, like a full 60-minute lunch break for a 6-hour day doesn't seem,
Seems to be a lot.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that's
Yeah,
what-
yeah,
I think that's where you kind of leave it a little bit vague, not to exceed, so then that allows the department head the scalability, so people aren't saying, well, I'm here 6 hours and 1 minute, therefore I'm only actually working 5 hours. I think to say, if you hit the 6 hours, you're entitled to your half, and interdepartmentally, you can kind of figure out the best way to approach or assign in a fair fashion to the employees in that department, a kind of standard for what to expect in a day.
Right, but I mean, I think Krista was aiming for having a maximum of 60 minutes, which I'm fine with that.
But it's
But
a-
not for a 6-hour day.
No, but that's what Josh is saying,
Yeah.
so that's a maximum. So what he's saying is we need to include language that you
Oh.
have to take at least
Yeah.
30 minutes if you're over 6 hours,
Okay,
but then you would have a maximum of an hour.
okay, okay.
Is
Got
at the discretion of your
Thanks.
schedule and the department head.
So in terms of what's logistically possible, you can program it by department so that the break, if that's automatically applied, you could say, okay, well, that department is automatically at 30 minutes, or that department is whatever you all decide. But I do need a number to plug in as the automatic number, ideally. So
30.
I think 30 is the automatic
I'll go
number.
with 30.
Okay.
Yeah. But then.
we're not making any decisions right now, but
But
at least
then,
that
but
helps
we
me
haven't
with my
decided whether
language.
that's paid or unpaid, is that correct? That's just,
You would have to decide that.
yeah,
You-
right,
you
but,
could tell me
but I'm
paid
saying
or
plug,
unpaid.
when you're plugging in that number, that's not, we're saying, plug it in for 30 minutes, but we haven't said whether it's paid or not, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
I would suggest that you eliminate the word meal and just have
right, just
breaks.
breaks, yeah.
That's a
Or,
good idea.
or break, work breaks, or however you want to do it, because I think that the meal piece kind of skews the thought process a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm thinking,
Because it feels like within the heading of break, we have different kinds, all of which I can't say I completely understand, most of which I can say I'm probably not in favor of.
Hopefully you're in favor of meal break.
But I think, but I think that the majority is definitely moving in a certain direction, although I'm not exactly sure what that is.
So something like work break.
I think work breaks, yeah,
Mhm.
something like that would be better. Because you've characterized all the breaks for the most part as being either 15-minute or 30-minute, and so, perhaps within the heading of B break, you have, a subsection for 15-minute breaks and a subsection for the mandatory half-hour break after 6 hours. will help clarify things a little bit. I'm really struggling, I will admit, to see why we need to have so many different options in so many different places. I understand people do different work, but it just seems, from the it seems so loose that it becomes, from a performance standpoint, it feels like there's challenges for managing this. And this conversation is making me wonder actually about our performance standards and how they're measured from department to department, and what consistency do we have regarding employee performance, which really should be across the organization. It doesn't matter whether you work for the fire department, or you work for buildings and grounds, or you work in the clerk's office. Those performance standards should be pretty consistent, I think. So this conversation's made me really curious about that.
It's work site to work site. That's the variability here for our breaks,
Yeah,
as opposed to department to department. Just wanted to clarify that.
yeah,
Because there are departments within this building.
yeah, no, I understand. I mean, it's all well and fine to say we're all adults here. Unfortunately, our experience recently has proven us some are more adult than others.
Right.
Yeah,
No, agreed,
And-
yeah.
yeah,
And we
Trust but
have,
verify.
and we have to have, we have
Sure.
to have a mechanism that makes sure that we have the check and balances in place, that when unfortunately we do have someone who comes to work for us, who is the exception, and perhaps struggles to work independently and within the confines of the rules we set forth, we need to have a way to help that person, identify that person, help them meet those standards, but if even after our help they don't, find a way to separate them from the organization.
If the purpose of providing breaks is to relieve employees of their duty, I would say that it would be important to consider the fact that if this were a pattern, to use the rest break at the end of the day, then it negates the need for the rest break.
Right.
And so that's where I would say I think we need a little bit more uniformity and consider that to be the exception rather than the rule. If you were to provide any flexibility for employees, it could be done on a department level, as long as that's carved out.
Well, people also have personal time, and people have vacation time, and people have sick days. I mean, we have allowed for people to take paid time off to do the things that they want to do or feel the need to do. I understand that stuff comes up, but some of that's just, to some extent, planning your day out and arranging things such that you get stuff done. I mean, there is a cohesiveness within the organization that I think we have to maintain, and then there's also a productivity piece of just being efficient and effective. And if I'm trying to balance all those thoughts in my head right now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Dan, but I also think that we're not gonna set within this employment policy, what the performance criteria are for
Correct,
each
yeah.
individual staff person. I mean, that's really up to the department head. And while it's true that we do provide vacation and sick time and paid, and personal time, somebody who's really jammed because they're a single mom or single parent and, and has childcare issues, that's hard to address through, through those mechanisms. And I'm thinking of my sister who has an adult son with cognitive and physical impairments, and she often has to, modify her work schedule in order to accommodate his special needs. So I don't know. I mean, it just seems like that's a conversation, certainly the break, the 30 minutes or whatever we're gonna do of break time during the day should be standardized, but the conversation about what is your job and what are your performance standards, like in the annual evaluation process, what are your goals, what am
Yeah,
I
I wasn't
expecting
taking
from
it that
you?
far. I
Yeah.
was talking just strictly from the standpoint of
Right.
attendance and
Okay,
timekeeping.
all right, just want to make sure that I understood that, because that's where, I think that's where I was meaning or talking about people being grown-ups and sort of doing their work. And I understand, you're absolutely right. I mean, some people may take advantage of a system or just not be able to comply with those performance standards, and that's up to the department head or their boss to supervise them and call them out and help them change their behavior or find a different place to work.
So, I mean, back to the issue at hand,
Right.
I mean, I think we're still, have we resolved the paid lunch break issue? or
We hadn't
the
decided
amount
whether it
of
was paid or not. I think we said we'd like people to have a required 30-minute break if they work 6 hours or over that.
Right,
And then
and then.
I think there was a majority in agreement that there would be a maximum of 60 minutes for the day beyond
Mhm.
that. But we hadn't talked about whether it would be paid or not. Was still up in the air.
I'm in favor of being paid.
I also
am
am
too,
in
yeah.
favor of it being paid.
I could go along with
There you go.
Yeah, okay. Marty says yes too, so, okay. So, yeah, so what, did we clarify I feel like,
think
we
so.
kind of talked
Got
in
it all.
circles, so I'm like, yeah, okay.
So
Was
if you
there,
just recapture that and just get it back out again, that'd be great.
So
Yeah, summarize.
the additional language that I have is following not to exceed 60 minutes and are encouraged to take a minimum of 30 minutes for a meal.
I would say must.
I would
shall.
must,
I would say it's shall.
shall, that,
yeah.
I mean, it's
by
required that
law,
they
so,
take a
yeah.
break, so,
Okay.
And
I
some,
would
yeah.
even quote I would even put the.
yeah, you can
Statute in
quote the
there.
Statute
statute,
in there.
yeah, if you have access to it, yeah.
And my one other suggestion is looking at it might be, how do we pay it? Not to exceed 60 minutes at the manager's discretion. So that way, it
Yeah.
kind of gives the manager the leeway to have the 6 hours, 30-minute baked in, and then to kind of pull back, like you're only working 6 hours, you're not gonna get a full hour break for that. Or based on conditions to have some flexibility or run around with the other half an hour not identified by statute time we're allotting for.
Yeah,
One of the
Eligible
advantages of this
breaks.
policy is being able to rely on that uniformity, though, and the more you carve out of it for the town manager's discretion,
Oh, not town, department heads, I'm sorry, not town, department heads discretion.
in terms of,
The department head pretty much would set the break pattern, would, in my thought, set the break pattern for the crew.
Beyond the 30.
Beyond the 30 minutes.
okay,
Does that overcomplicate your time clock system? No, okay.
no, as long as it's clear
There's-
how that works.
If the 2 15-minute breaks are paid, it doesn't have anything to do with the time clock. I mean, you're not clocking in and out for your 15-minute breaks, are you?
Right,
No.
yeah,
No,
that's true.
so-
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
It's really but what I'm struggling with is the breaks not to exceed 60 minutes. Feels like that could become the hour-long lunch break, and I don't think that that should be an option.
I'm fine with people taking an hour lunch break
too.
personally, but
Okay, well, then we're done.
yeah.
Okay.
yeah, I mean, it should specify that, that all breaks could be combined to a maximum, or something. Breaks you're eligible for, you don't automatically, however.
Right, that's why we're renaming it work break,
Yeah.
so that within that, the paid meal break is required. But then how that, up to the 60 minutes, that would then be up to the department head's discretion as they determine the work schedule.
And would that still include And leaving an hour
That's,
early?
that's where I was just gonna ask that question. I'm a little bit,
I would like to discourage that.
I would like to
Yeah, I-
discourage that
I
also.
do not agree with that at all. I do not
Yeah.
allow that in my staff. The meal break is there for a reason, and that is
Yeah.
to get the rest you need throughout the day. If you go 7.5 hours to get out a half an hour early, you are doing damage to yourself and probably the
I
organization.
think it's, yeah, I agree. I think it's odd to have, I think if you need to restructure your schedule because you're having some sort of conflict with your personal life versus your work life, you need to have that conversation with your boss and maybe come in early
Yes.
or leave a little later, but I don't think you should just get your lunch break at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think that's very odd.
Right,
and-
right. If you need to leave an hour early,
Yeah.
you should be able to take personal time to do that.
Or you take personal time, right, whichever, yeah, I'm
But
So,
I would also, I mean, and I think that coming in an hour early is sort of the flex time
yeah,
issue, which I favor.
I would favor that too, but that, I don't know, that sounds like it might be,
That's another can of worms.
right, yeah, so,
The
we don't,
next revision.
right, we don't have
That's
to
the next guy down the
incorporate
road.
that in the language, but I think we need to leave some discretion to managers to manage their staff, and
Right,
if,
but
if they feel they have the flexibility to make those,
so my question would be, would you like
no,
to?
you think that's not,
I think the flexibility is that 15-minute window,
okay,
right? If someone's a little bit late, then that's fine, but if anything over 15 minutes, what the clocks do is they round up to the half hour. And
Okay.
I think we should consider that going above what is like a normal arrival time.
Yeah, I think that's
And then
more
it's
than
leave.
generous, quite frankly.
What's that?
Okay.
I think that's too generous,
yeah.
but.
Well, yeah, so perhaps, yeah, I mean, it sounds like maybe people need to be taking personal time if their schedule is, really differs from their traditional day.
Would you say like shall not take the meal break at the beginning or end of the day, or you highly recommended not to, just to kind of?
so I'd say, yeah.
Shall
I
not.
would say shall,
Yeah, you need to tell me.
Yeah,
whether
that's what I was
Yep,
going for,
thank
rather
you.
than this is a strong suggestion, or
Thank
this is
you.
a highly recommended versus this
Yeah.
is policy.
Right, ultimately, it shouldn't be up to the staff administrating
Right,
time
right.
off. Yeah.
okay.
My other high priority is the years of service question.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
Could we talk about that?
Of course.
Yeah.
Which page are
yeah.
you on?
This would be on the draft, page 7,
Okay.
section 2.
Packet page 10.
So I've shortened the definitions section and only kept those that I think are truly essential. We're going to be adding the workday definition, but years of service is essential because that does come into play when we determine eligibility for certain benefits and what tier people are accruing time at. So that also retirement is dependent on years of service, but previously we have not had a definition of it.
Okay,
So I've included an example of how we might define it, but in terms of how you all decide to, you can define that as any employee who has been employed by the town in any capacity. That could be another definition that we use for years of service.
so that would include per diem employees, is that what you're?
Correct.
Okay,
So someone could work for the town as a per diem 12 hours a week, and then for 10 years, and then when they become full-time, potentially be eligible for benefits at the 10-year mark, as opposed to sort of starting their eligibility when they become full-time.
that would include things like vacation accrual and
Correct.
the sick
The
time
retirement
payouts that,
contribution.
The retirement contribution, yeah.
What's that?
No, I was just suddenly wondering, what other steps do you have based on longevity of service? I know it's pay, or vacation, 401k contribution. I think was that it?
It's vacation and.
Oh, and also seniority in the department, yeah.
457.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you've worked, to your example, if you've worked a 4-hour shift for X number of years and then you become a full-time employee, those benefits are the same as someone who had worked as a full-time employee for that same length of time.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they should be.
No.
Right, I agree.
So
That's the question.
I think there needs to be some, I would suggest that there needs to be some way of
prorating.
prorating that previous
Yeah.
service.
I mean, could you calculate it based on the hours they've accrued?
We could.
Or is that too
It
complicated?
becomes
Okay,
extremely complicated.
yeah,
Yeah.
all right.
In terms of the way you continue to mark their anniversary. It's just so much simpler if you say, well, this is your anniversary date. This is the date in which we're going to start your clock, so to speak.
Okay,
So,
This is another instance for me, again, where not being a human resources expert, and, you know, I have my personal experience as to how my seniority was calculated over the years. You know, if there are some industry standards or choices, you know, for different options.
you're looking at it.
So this is the only,
This isn't the only, but I would say this is pretty industry standard in terms of saying you're eligible if you're a part-time employee at minimum. You start your years of service.
but you
That
have to
would be the
work
most
1,000, but you have to work, if you're a part-time employee, you have to work at least 1,000 hours in a 12-month period, right?
So the 1,000-hour question is something I can get into. It's an IRS requirement that if someone is working, it's a requirement that someone be eligible for retirement benefits if they work over 1,000 hours a year. So the way I've defined part-time is a 20-hour work week at minimum.
halftime, yes,
Um,
Okay.
The 20-hour work week is 1,040 hours.
Okay, that's what I was just gonna do some quick math, but that, yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
roughly 2,000 hours.
So if you carve it out as at least 1,000 hours of service, then you can define that eligibility by that mark. That's still consistent with that. Yeah, you've got then a potential gap between 1,000 and 1,040. So that's where I, with the attorney's help, put some language in there in the definition of part-time excluding benefits. So on page 8
Oh.
of the draft, I've included that classification for an employee. We do have this classification, but we call it per diem, which is a misnomer because per diem
Oh, part-time
employees
excluding
are
benefits.
not regular employees.
Right,
They have the
right.
option to turn down a shift. But our regular employees who are not working 20 hours do not have the option to turn down a shift. They must show up. Otherwise, they face performance issues.
Okay.
And so, in this case, we do have employees who are part-time excluding benefits. So they're regular employees, but they're not working the 20 hours. So in that, I've also matched the 1,000 hours mark to say, if we discover that an employee has worked 1,000 hours the previous year, we're going to reclassify them as part-time. That's only fair.
Do we have to then retroactively honor benefits that they should have been receiving during that year of service?
No,
No.
just going forward.
Okay.
It wasn't necessarily intentional.
No, I understand. Yeah, I'm just,
I used to think I was a reasonably intelligent guy until you just had that last conversation. So can you walk me through the per diem piece again, because I lost you there?
Absolutely. So per diem, we've basically said that in previous policies, we've had the category of those who are not qualifying for benefits as part-time or full-time employees are called per diem employees.
Okay,
That is the only category we currently have.
okay,
And I'm carving out 2 additional categories as part-time excluding benefits, those who are working regular hours but aren't working 20 hours.
and where am I looking for that language?
That's page 8,
types of,
under types of employment,
types
part
of
C,
employment, C.
Okay, thank you.
3C. And then I've also created a category for on-call or call members. It's more or less a definition of what we currently have for our call fire department members.
That's different than per diem, the on-call?
The distinction is that they're paid at different rates. Correct.
But why would we have to call them something different just because they're paid at different rates? I mean, everyone's paid hourly employees are paid at different rates, but we don't have a distinction.
Because I guess they're also, the other distinction there is that they can choose to take a shift last minute. So if they have a radio, they can choose to go to the call or not go to the call. They don't have to inform their supervisor, they can just show up.
Whereas per diem employees accept a shift.
They accept a shift, and that's prearranged in advance.
Okay, right.
So the only arrangement with call members is to show up, and you're paid at a minimum wage to do that.
And
Whereas our
call,
per diem members are compensated very well.
and call members are in which group?
They're in non-regular employment.
So that would be group 4?
So that's group 4, yep.
Yeah, okay.
And within the types of employment, where would they fall?
So I think I've mentioned that under classifications on page 8. So all other employees, including those working temporary per diem or on-call positions, are group 4.
And those and part-time employees working less than 20 hours would be that group
Would-
also,
Correct.
yeah.
And so, and when you go down to C, the types of employment,
Right.
I would add the part-time employees working less than 20 hours in your list. I know you wrote including, and so that's not all inclusive, but, I
The
would
reason
rather.
why,
Okay, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say maybe changing the language to just include everyone who would be in that group might be clearer, but perhaps you had a reason for not writing it down.
In group 3, I provided the hour numbers. So
Yeah,
regular part-time employees working from 20 to 34 hours per week.
right.
All other employees
Are down.
fall into group
Yes, I
4.
understood it. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if someone didn't see themselves reflected in that group just by reading it, that might add some confusion, but you know, if you feel strongly otherwise,
Yeah, this made sense to me as written.
okay, that's fine then.
Yeah, I don't want it to be confusing, so if you have a
Yeah,
a
no,
suggestion,
I
let me
wasn't
know.
confused by it. I was just thinking if someone were to be confused. If no one's confused, then it's fine as is.
Okay.
So, just back to the question at hand, we're deciding years of service. I mean, I think the way you've defined it makes sense, with the exception that I guess somebody working only 20 hours is still earning a year of service even though they're not working a full-time job, and I mean, I don't know if that creates some unfairness or not, I don't know.
I think it helps.
feels like
to-
it does to me, but.
Yeah.
I definitely understand that, but I think personally, I think it's a good way to help the town recruit, retrain, and help grow people in its service. If you were to say this is, years of service is even applicable to your per diems or hourly, that's where I'm like, if you're working 2 hours a week for 10 years, you should not be able to come into the top tier
Yeah,
benefits.
I definitely don't wanna have that
But if you
there.
have been a regular employee who has successfully, aided this town on a regular schedule for 5 years, and suddenly through a promotion or through enhanced training becomes a full-time, I definitely think that in service should be taken into account in determining their eligibility or their benefits package.
Yeah, it does say here active, regular, full-time or
Right.
part-time employees, right, which I think I'm comfortable with that, I don't.
But I definitely hear that, you're giving a lot to someone for not doing as much as
Yeah.
someone else. But again, I think that retaining people and having talented people be able to grow in this organization is certainly, a prize goal.
Well, they're still reliable, they're
Right,
here,
right.
working.
Define active for me.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So continuous service as an active full-time employee, meaning you haven't taken a year off between, right? So it implies that if you were to leave service with the town, you're giving up that eligibility for certain benefits, right? So if you were to return to employment with the town, your time resets. You could carve this out as, instead of continuous service, cumulative service. in which case someone who has worked for the town for a period of time and then leaves service and then returns after a period of time, then would be eligible for that accrual rate that's higher based on the cumulative number of years.
So if that said total number of years of continuous.
You mean
ser-
cumulative?
Continuous uninterrupted service?
Well, but then you're excluding people who go out on like FMLA leave or something.
Continuous is, I guess, one of those terms that the attorney thought it was consistent with terminology that would be enforceable to say that you can't leave employment with the town and then come back and be eligible.
You use the attorney word, so that trumps anything that I'm gonna suggest.
Yeah, I'm
When she
definitely
doesn't-
not, I'm not in favor of people having cumulative service where they are here and then they leave for a year or two or more and then they come back and then all the time they had earned still counts towards all
They
the,
bridge that downtime.
yeah, yeah.
Just on a practical level too, it is difficult to administer that because the payroll software company has asked us to create a new account for them when that happens.
Oh, okay.
So
That would be
just for the
awkward.
sake of
Yeah.
clarity in terms of tracking time, when employees do come back after a period of time, we create a new account for them. The exception being certain per diem employees, right? So-
Yeah, but they wouldn't be eligible
On a
under
practical
this
level-
definition anyway, so.
Right.
Yeah. Are others comfortable with the way it's defined here? Your
Yeah.
years
That's
of
fine.
service? Yeah, yeah. Matthew? No?
Yeah, I don't know, I think there are circumstances where people might leave for a year for whatever reason, you know, and come back, and to say that, you know, that 10 years you worked here before, then here counts for nothing, you know, I mean, but I
Yeah.
understand the difficulty.
Well, I mean,
What-
I guess I would be open to a window of time
How
that
often
you've
is that
gone,
gonna happen?
but,
Right, I don't know.
but if it's, you know, more than a year, you've kind of left at that.
Right, and I don't wanna
Yeah.
it's just a random thought, I don't wanna overcomplicate things, you know. Fine, I didn't say it.
Yeah, that did actually happen to my mother at one point. She left a job briefly and went back, but
Yeah,
she had to
my
start.
wife did
She had to
that.
start over.
I'd be
Yeah.
amenable to some, like, even like a
Yeah.
6 months if like, okay, I'm going to leave work for this great company and I'm really sorry, guys, and then they close on my first day.
Yeah,
And I'm
that
like,
can happen.
Town of Gray's still hiring. I know I'm really skilled in this position. I'd hate to lose the 10 years that I put in based on a 1 week.
Yeah,
That,
But it's also consider your options wisely. So yeah.
The 1 week won't happen
Right.
because we've defined it as when an employee completes at least 1,000 hours of service.
For the year. So yeah.
So you can go on a break. You could theoretically work full-time and then go on a break of a few months and then come back.
Oh.
you see, but
Okay.
there's nothing continuous about that. That's one of the reasons why I was suggesting that it should say, that you should add uninterrupted in there. But I find myself in the minority again, so we should just move on.
So instead of continuous, be uninterrupted? Is that what you're saying?
well, I think he's saying continuous and uninterrupted, rather than.
But you could consider going on leave a kind of interruption, and you
Right,
would want
that's-
someone ineligible
that-
because of having to take leave.
That's
Well,
where
if
I
it
would
was
get.
if it was a protected leave, it wouldn't,
Correct.
it wouldn't count against them. Because you can't penalize someone for going out on FMLA.
Correct, you can't, but you wouldn't want to create wording in here that implies
Perception
that we
that-
can.
Right.
Well,
And that's where I would say,
well, again, it's, you know, we don't have to finish the conversation. 'Cause
sounds like-
everybody else has got
Well, it also sounds like the lawyer thought that continuous language
Nice.
was.
the A word, yep.
Yeah.
But is it, again, this is sort of a utopian, idea or whatever of mine, but is there any sort of option for a leave of absence or sabbatical or something like that? Like, why do I have to wait till I'm 65 to go sailing for, like if I have this sailboat, for a few months or whatever? Why couldn't I do it in my 40s and, and not, you know, I don't know.
You do, you quit your job, you
Yeah,
go
there
sailing,
are-
and then you find another job.
There
when you
are
get back.
companies that
Well,
have
yes,
sabbaticals.
Yes,
If you want to
but there are
create that
also
policy, we
sabbaticals.
can.
What's that?
It's up to you.
Yeah.
If you want to create that policy, we can.
Right, right.
In terms of administering benefits, that's certainly a possibility, and I'd be in favor of it in terms of retaining and
think
recruiting employees.
Anyone with 35 years of service definitely should be eligible for
For a
a
sabbatical?
sabbatical.
Are you being serious or are you?
Well, I think, I mean, if you look in the teaching profession or other places where they have sabbaticals, there's.
You have to be there quite a long
You
time.
have to,
Yeah.
you have to, you have to, yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
And you have to join a union.
No, not necessarily.
You don't have-
Necessarily,
No.
Anyway,
It's a whole other I mean,
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
not.
it's an interesting
Can of
thought,
worms.
definitely.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I think if you're
definitely-
here a long time, perhaps it would be a worthwhile benefit.
For the next
uh,
revision.
but Maybe if the
Yes,
town
yeah.
manager wants
But-
to stay for 30 years.
Well, it might be interesting, even to put like, it might be interesting to put a thought into like 20 or 25 years of service at a certain point in time,
Yeah.
just some kind of, if you're looking to retain someone that long, maybe something else in there. Again, definitely outside of the conversation we're
Yeah.
having now, but maybe worthy of consideration for the next time this discussion's running around.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to dive into sabbaticals this year, but I would be curious if potentially exploring it at some other time. Were there any other policy positions you needed input
Well-
on, John?
It's all policy.
Well, sure, I mean, like in particular.
really thorny ones.
I think that it can be thorny when we're talking about disciplinary issues. I've separated out appeals from grievances. Grievances has been our catch-all, but
Yeah,
in this case, appeals are specific to disciplinary issues. And the
okay,
grievance policy is everything but. And I've appreciated that suggestion that was made by our attorney, because in that way, it's a little bit simpler in terms of keeping track and making the point that the grievance procedure is there not as a catch-all or to confuse anyone, but to, as a benefit to our employees, to say that we care and we are going to try to make things right if we can.
mhm.
And the appeals process is specific to disciplinary issues.
How does the appeal, I'm sorry, I didn't compare them word for word, appeals versus grievance. The process for hearing an appeal is similar to that of a
What page
grievance,
are you on?
right?
It's very similar.
Page 36 and
Six.
Thank you.
39 for the
39,
packet.
Yeah, it's very similar. In this case, though, there are fewer steps involved. It would be appealing to the town manager. Appealing to the town manager in the case of step 3, or step 4, you're appealing to the town council. So step 3 or step 4 are suspension and termination.
I guess the only thing I'd say on this section is I think it's too complicated and there's too long a path from beginning to end. But
Well,
again, this
but-
was another attorney
I
conversation.
think on
so-
the flip side of that, our former process went right to the town council without any checks along the way, so that was also not ideal.
I don't disagree with you there, but
Yeah,
it just,
Are you
Feels
talking
like
about
these-
grievance or discipline?
well, frankly, I don't see why we have both. That's another conversation for me. I don't see the need to have two separate paths for these issues. Maybe there's a legal requirement, I don't know.
It does seem like they're meaningfully different. I mean,
Yeah.
if I'm getting sexually harassed by my, in the workplace, and then that's a grievance.
Yeah.
And it's not a disciplinary action.
There's literally a separate file.
Yeah,
So anything that's disciplinary goes in the employee file. Everything else, like the grievances piece, any harassment, that goes in a separate file. And I think that distinction is important because I'm the one administrating that, and it's helpful to have someone tell me what to do, especially if I would like to hand this off to someone at some point. So that's where I would say that's helpful on an administrative side. And it's also, again, going back to this distinction between being disciplined and having a grievance for a reason that's outside of the disciplinary actions that we've been that are mentioned in the policy. Again, it's just language, but for me, the language matters.
No, it does matter.
In arguing that to have a grievance, it's not because you've done anything wrong. And to make an appeal is specific to a disciplinary action that's been taken against you. You have similar actions that you can take if you've had a disciplinary action against you that's short of suspension or termination. But I guess it all comes back to what message is sent to employees about how this is being used as well. So I guess that's the second reason. The first reason is helping me. The second reason is helping employees understand that the purpose for a grievance is something outside of the disciplinary relationship.
Right, I
There's
think,
certainly something disciplinary about sexual harassment.
Well, but not for the
But
person.
not for the
yeah,
person.
no, I mean,
but
it seems to me that the distinction is, disciplinary action is from the employer to the employee. A
Right.
grievance is from the employee to other employees or to, or up the.
Or their
to
manager.
the
To the
employer,
yeah,
to the
department head,
manager.
department
Yeah,
head,
that's,
or-
and that's a
yeah.
meaningful distinction. And the grievance may or may not be around a performance issue, for example, where a disciplinary action might very well be. And to, to, just thinking about Dan's comment that, that there are a lot of steps, am I right in seeing that there's no particular time sequence or time allotment to each step? Like, there could be a week, there could be 3 months between each step. It kind of depends on the scenario, right? So it could be happening, that you could
No,
go
for
through
For
the.
discipline.
For
yes.
discipline, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Do we outline, you mentioned in the appeals of step 3 and step 4 disciplinary actions. I'm not seeing those defined anywhere in this policy. I'm assuming it's just in.
It's in the types of action. If you go up there, I guess I could have
Oh,
numbered those as
over
well.
here.
I didn't also number them. What I could do is also number them, so that's a little bit clearer. But
Yes, maybe
verbal and
just.
written warnings is 1 and 2, suspension is 3, and termination is 4. I can make that
Yeah, I would just,
visually
somehow
more
make it more obvious you're referencing
Yep.
the types of action in the
Thank you.
appeals section. Yeah,
Using
Yeah.
some sort of, outline
yeah.
numbering system would.
Or couldn't you just say in case of suspension or termination?
Yeah,
Repeat.
you could do that. Yeah, that would.
Sure.
Mhm.
Is there any reason why there isn't time associated with these?
Because discipline can take weeks, months. You don't want it to run, typically, you wouldn't be considering disciplinary actions over the case of 3 or 4 years, but you might have a span of time between one disciplinary action and another, but they're related. And in that case, you would want to link them. You wouldn't want to put a time limit in that regard on disciplinary actions that might be stepped up. So if, for instance, someone has, if we're talking about performance issues in terms of attendance, if someone has an attendance issue in January and then has an attendance issue in June, you want to be able to link those two things. Whereas with the grievance policy, it puts a time limit on when you can speak up about that.
Yeah, I think we're thinking time in a different sense.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But, no, that's not your fault. Like, for the section on verbal and written warnings, under the types of action, is there a limit to the number of verbal or written warnings?
I think the guidance that I would provide for employees is to follow the steps of progressive discipline. You would want to move from a verbal to a written warning as your step 2. And you wouldn't want there to be 3 or 4 verbal warnings without moving to a written warning.
But there's nothing in here that says that.
There's nothing, no.
Yeah, that's what I'm struggling with. Because I disagree with you that a disciplinary issue should drag on for months.
Well, you can have a remedy, for
You can
instance,
have, you
if
can certainly have a remedy and then the issue's resolved, yeah.
it's resolved,
And then it
For the
comes
time
back,
being,
and then it comes back
but
It can
again.
come back around
it comes
again.
back,
Yeah.
like I said, from January to June, it could come back. After you've resolved it, the person's attendance has improved, there are no issues.
I guess I'm not making myself clear.
Sure.
I don't think that you should be able to give 8 verbal warnings before you decide to do a written one.
Agreed.
But there's nothing in here that dictates that you shouldn't do 8 verbal warnings before you do a written one.
So you're saying we should put a cap on the verbal
Yeah,
warnings
I
before it
think-
moves to a written,
I think,
For related,
for related, well,
You get in quick water really quickly, and I
Yeah.
just think leaving it up to our human resources director, who will help guide people who are
Nope.
engaging in this, and the department heads.
nope, you're never gonna get my vote that way.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but that's just too
What would-
open-ended
What
for
would be
me.
your preferred course of action?
Well,
By
I-
saying, no, I mean, you would say, if you have X,
Yeah,
then you get a
I
written.
mean, I think if you have more than a couple of verbal warnings, it becomes a written warning
In the course of a career, in the course of a year,
in the course of the event.
what if they are
verbals.
unrelated events?
They're in parallel,
because it's a performance issue.
because it's a
Yeah.
performance issue.
I'd say, 2 verbals and then a written.
Yeah, and then a written warning. And then and then you can have, I think there needs to be an opportunity to,
over what time period? I mean, I was 15 minutes late last year, and I was 15 minutes late this year, and I got 2 verbal warnings, and if I'm 15 minutes late next year, I get a written warning?
I think that, obviously, there needs to be language, because I'm not saying that you're gonna fire someone because they're late 3 times in their career of 30 years. Not implying that at all.
Well,
But,
that's the
But-
time limit that I'm concerned about, I guess, is, like, over what time do you accrue these? I mean, I had a supervisor that would put things, like, from 10 years ago in my performance appraisal, like this baggage,
Yeah, that's not,
Yeah, that
I would
seems
consider
excessive.
that to be the business standard, that's not
I
best
think
practice
that's
at all.
grievance. but-
Yeah, that's a
on your-
grievance.
for you.
Oh, I could agree with it, absolutely, but.
But I think that there's, yeah,
This is one of those categories that I will say that the more prescriptive you are, the more it binds the town to doing a certain thing. So you'll see language that we've included here where it says, this policy does not provide contractual rights regarding employee discipline or
Yep.
counseling. At any time the town determines it is necessary, as in the case of a major breach of policy or violation of law, the town reserves the right to immediately proceed to appropriate action up to and including termination. We can skip all the steps together, we can do the steps in any order that we want. The purpose behind it is
Just fire someone
because
and then give them a warning.
there are going to be times when you will have disciplinary actions that are taken for various reasons that aren't as linear. And so you might, I'd say that what we can categorize, and I can show you how human resources professionals categorize certain types of action based on performance issues, conduct. You can do that and then follow that line. And I would suggest that what we should do is be progressive in this sense. If you give a verbal warning for attendance and then you have to give another warning, if we're progressing, we go to written warning.
if,
Right, but the only reason a warning is taking place is if I'm helping with it. So that's another part of this.
So what
there-
happens if,
Yeah, go ahead.
if you're not here, do other people understand that process?
I
or-
would hope so.
Yeah, okay.
Anyone worth their salt in my position would understand.
so why would you be involved in a verbal warning or a written warning?
Because it is, so a verbal warning is a name for the first warning,
Right,
right? So,
But it's still documented.
it's
Well,
still,
it's the first step on the ladder
still
that leads to
discipline.
termination.
I
yeah.
understand,
yeah,
but why would you be involved?
because I need to review it before anything happens, because the town, I'm there to help shepherd the process.
Yeah, so we don't get ourselves into some liability or something.
yeah.
Because whatever you put on paper is on behalf of the town is liable for.
Yeah,
So it's always good to use certain language and there is an art as well as a science to it.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
true. Perhaps more so.
Yeah, I guess, like I said, my time concern would be, like, at what point does a verbal warning sort of drop off the screen where you're not going progressive discipline because of a verbal warning? How long ago, you know?
That's kind of, in a way, it's kind of written in there, because anytime you have, or taking these actions, one of the things that is in the policy is to include a time frame for completion of the remediation, as well as language that said, in order for the town to consider that each issue resolved. So there is kind of a built-in mechanism for a final saying, in a way, again, without recurring, but to say like, okay, for now, we are gonna put this aside.
I think that the counselor might be referring to cases where we have employees who have been here 30 years,
Right.
and I can go back in their history and say, oh, you know,
I found
they
it,
made a
yeah.
mistake, and I'm going to bring that up
Right,
20 years later,
Yeah.
and that would not be ethical.
right.
No,
To be
that'd
honest
be a
with you.
dead issue.
Yeah.
What's that?
It would
That'd
be
be a dead issue, and I've been.
Correct,
just
right.
for lack of
Correct.
a better way to say it.
But,
So anything, frankly, just, you know, as a rule of thumb, anything over 2 years, you're running into the potential for someone to say, listen, that's not reasonable.
but do we write that down instead of just
I
making it a
don't
rule
think we
of thumb?
want to write that
Okay.
down.
Because you
be-
feel like it's boxing us in certain
does.
situations. Okay.
Yeah.
okay,
So I think that's where, you know, the council will want to have some trust that the staff can administrate this part of the process. And I think it's just helpful to have people with that kind of experience.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree.
Yeah.
But I think this is much more defined than what we had.
It's
It is,
layers,
oh,
but-
for it, yes, by
absolutely.
leaps and bounds, for sure. Okay. So it seems like most of us are comfortable with the current language for that.
Okay.
No?
No, I would agree.
Oh, okay. Is there anything else you wanna call our attention to? Just looking at, it is 7:45.
I've hit some of the highlights and
Okay.
certainly the more urgent issues prompting this conversation.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your time.
Okay,
This is not, it's not an easy thing to parse all of this.
no,
and
I
the
understand.
language is complicated, and there are always these ifs and ands.
Yeah.
And sitting down, the attorney, the conversation that I had with the attorney, that I thought would be an hour-long conversation, turned into 3 hours very quickly.
Oh, okay,
And so that is where we get into, okay, well, we're only looking at the red language. We can always return to the language in black too, and go through that with a finer comb. But for now, I think this gets us into a much better position, and
Okay.
I appreciate your patience with it.
Yeah, we're happy to look at it, and certainly we appreciate the improvement in processes and
Yeah.
language. I think past practice has been for the council to vote on personnel policy
Correct.
changes. So,
Whenever there's a financial component.
right, so, but I'm not sure, well, I guess we did touch on the meal break as a financial component, so we should vote on that.
My suggestion would be
Okay,
to prepare a draft for a meeting
Okay.
where you could vote on the.
yes, that was gonna be my
Policy.
question. Would you like to do that in the new year, or do you wanna try to take care of it in December? What is your timeline for,
As soon as
Edits.
possible would
Okay.
be great for me.
yeah, okay.
So if we could put it on the December agenda, that would be great.
Yeah, I think we've talked through a lot of it here, so we shouldn't need a lot of time in the
Yeah.
meeting to rehash what we've seen.
Yep,
So
I would agree.
if you make edits aligned with the conversation we've had tonight, it should be a fairly quick vote, so I think that would be.
Would you recommend that I take so what I can do is take the language that I have put together, and then if there's anything that I've added, create a new color, like use blue?
I would say everything here that's red becomes black,
Yeah.
except for the things we talked about.
Okay. Okay.
I keep copies of your saved changes as you go, just so in case there was oh wait, what was that in the original versus the second versus the third, just so we have some record for it.
You'll see a new date on the
Yep, yeah.
draft too.
Right, yeah, because if everything's red and then you
Do more red.
do more color, yeah, it can get kind of confusing, but,
That's where the track changes.
yeah.
Well, and that's where when we talked earlier in the summer, that was what we decided. Is
Yeah,
that
that
when
we
we've
just
talked
accept
about
stuff.
something and
Yeah.
we've agreed upon it, that red language or green language becomes black, and
Right.
then all that shows is the next revision.
Right, and then that would help us, as we're reviewing it, to just kind of flag things that are,
Focus on
Definitely
the
new.
new stuff and
Yeah.
not rehash the old stuff.
yeah.
Lastly, I should point out, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, John.
I was going to say that we're using a conflict of interest disclosure form, and so I've included that on the back of the draft that's consistent with the language that's already there as part of our
Oh.
conflict of interest
Yeah.
policy. But I just wanted to let you know that we have been using both the personnel policy and the conflict of interest policy language on those two documents. And so I wanted you to be aware that that is the case. So I've included that to codify it,
Okay,
in case you
yeah.
have any questions about that. let
So
me know.
you're saying we've been using this language for a while, we just didn't have it in the personnel policy?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay,
The conflict of interest policy has always been there, and the form is consistent with that language.
right,
But I wanted to make sure it's reflected in the document itself,
okay,
if that's helpful.
it is, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
John, I just want, they've said it, but you did do a great job with this, and I really do appreciate all the changes and things that were missing that are suddenly included, like for me personally, having a job abandonment policy. We did not have one, so when we were struck with the
We needed
situation,
that.
it was, yeah. And it was just kind of nice, we are learning as we go and making sure that we reflect and get what our best steps are on paper.
So what, Paul?
Job abandonment,
Oh.
if someone just suddenly stops showing up to work, what do we do?
Fire them.
We didn't have it in policy.
Yeah, well,
So was it,
I won't prolong the conversation.
but that is now correct.
Yes, I want to thank you because I think
Yeah.
we have been very fortunate, not only because of your skills and abilities and your inclinations as far as the attention to detail is concerned. Whether we all agree on all the aspects of the changes, there's no doubt that we're in a much, much better place because we have this now. So I thank you for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think, I'd venture to guess that it's been probably decades since there's been this kind of thorough overhaul.
oh, I would, yeah, at least that, yeah,
The organizational piece is challenging. It's challenging to keep up with this kind of document, so you end up kind of adding to the list, and then the list doesn't talk to itself.
Yeah.
I look forward to the day when I stick a shovel in the ground and don't find a skeleton.
oh, yeah. I'm not sure that will be coming soon.
Maybe in your next life, Dan.
I don't think it's gonna happen in this one.
Okay, well, we can, I think, adjourn at 7:49 PM. I just want to thank Brad in the back there and John
Yeah.
Yes.
and Josh too for
you.
hanging in here with us.
And any of you who are panicking because you really thought it was 10 minutes of 8.
Right, that too. All right, good night.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.